Jane Addams came from a prosperous family that lived in the small town of Cedarville, Illinois. Well, after graduating from Rockford Seminary as an accomplished student and leader, she enrolled in medical school in 1881. But she didn't stay in medical school long because in just 1 month, she dropped out with a spinal illness. Her family fussed over her and put her in a straitjacket for treatment, basically turned her into an invalid. Well, years later, she admitted it was an emotional illness, for she knew no matter what she did, she wouldn't be taken seriously. She was still just a woman. Well, for the next 4 years, she fell into the pattern of a wealthy, single, educated woman with no work. Well, she attended lectures and did charity work and entertained guests in her home. Well, perhaps her friends and she may have even sat in her parlor and stitched away on pieces for a beautiful, crazy quilt as this. Oh, just look at the beautiful work. I love those flowers right in that burgundy velvet. It's wonderful. And the bird, that gray bird done with the chenille yarns, it's so cute. And the handwork, all of those intricate stitches. I love that purple butterfly with his gold body. So nice. And then there's stars. Stars that are applicated all over the top of this quilt. Oh, it's just beautiful. Well, hopefully, Jane did enjoy the quilting. Otherwise, in 1886, she wrote, "I am filled with shame that with all my apparent leisure, I have nothing at all to do." Well, then on her second trip to Europe, Addams had an inspiration, and she returned home with excitement and strength and opened the first settlement house in the United States. In the 19th Ward in Chicago, Ellen Starr and Jane opened Hull House. Now, Hull House became a haven for the immigrants who lived and worked in its surrounding tenements and shanties. Well, the Hull House workers helped them get medical care, education, emergency food, and even employment at a time when no government agencies existed to help them. Even the immigrant children attended their kindergarten, the playground, gymnasium, and after-school clubs. Well, by the early 1890s, 1,000 people participated in Hull House programs every week, and a staff of 90 volunteers helped Jane with her work. Well, for Jane Addams and her pioneer work in helping those less fortunate, I dedicate this star. Oh, it's just great in these Americana colors. I love the way the star just tends to just pinwheel right around there. Now, Pat Wetzel did this one, simple Americana border, and then a pinwheel finish right here. Well, unlike Jane, we do know what to do in our leisure time. So let's get started on that block. It's nice to add Jane Addams to the gallery with all of those other women of importance. Now you need to have 5 fabrics for her star, 3 different shades of red this time. You need to have a light medium red, this is the one I picked, a medium red, and then a dark red. Then you need to have a dark blue for the points of the star, and that same background fabric we're using over and over again. Now the center starts out with a 4-patch. So take those strips, I already did sew them together. They are 2 5/8 by 6 inches long. And when you measure them, when you seam them and press that seam to one side, right now, from edge to edge, they need to be 4 3/4 inches. And if they're not, you better go back and check that seam allowance. And so we have a square, so we have a 4-patch. Go ahead and cut it into 2 5/8 inch sections. Well, this has to be the easiest part of the block at least. So you're going to just take those 2 pieces, turn them in opposite directions so that when you flip them together, then those seams are just going to match perfectly right here. And you just have a touch to spare. Now the next part comes from 2 different sizes of squares. You need to have your medium red in 2 5/8 inch pieces. These are 4, 2 5/8 inch, and this is just 2 squares that are 4 1/4 inches. 4 1/4 inches, and what I'm going to do, just go ahead and take my 6 by 12, cut it once on one diagonal, and then just go ahead and cut it the opposite way. So we actually have that square cut into 4s, and then when you sew it together, you're going to do this. You're going to put it right like this, flip it onto here. So let me just take 2 stacks, and I'll get those going. Use a 1/4 inch seam allowance, line it up like this, and I have the edge on my presser foot, so I am going to just keep that lined up easily. Let's see, take one of these squares, flip it right sides together, and you do have a square up here you can match, and you've still got that tip down on the bottom. Boy, once you learn what size those tips are hanging out on each end, then you can really get this done well. Okay, and use your stiletto to help line that up, and just go ahead and assembly line sew all 4 of those going right through. Let me line this one up, push it right behind, and I'll just tell you about the ladies at Hull House. Oh, they were really lucky, those immigrant ladies, because whenever they stayed at the Hull House, when they visited, they could take classes on nutrition, on home management, and they even had union meetings going on right at the Hull House. That was pretty good. The settlement workers helped them with working for the union, and they certainly needed that one more piece. Let me just push that behind there, because the married immigrant women could work out of their home. It was easy for them to just go ahead and take piecework sewing home with them. Some of them even rolled cigars. Can you imagine doing that in their kitchen? And some of them even put together artificial flowers. Okay, now what we're going to do, just go ahead and set that seam, and then just lift it so that seam is just behind the triangle. Ooh, give it some steam. That's good. Okay, now just clip these 4 apart. Little assembly line sewing and ironing right here. Clip them apart, stack them up. Now we need to have those remaining triangles from the other 2. Stack those up, and this time we're just going to line them so that they go right along like that. Once again, you've got that square top. When you flip that together, you can match that up, and then that tip is just going to hang right over on the bottom. They're a little oversized. Gosh, a little oversizing sure helps. Well, let me get hold of those threads. I'm not holding my tongue right. Line that up right here, and then just assembly line sew those right on down too. But you know, the married immigrant women could work out of their homes, but their daughters had to go out, and most of the time, because of prejudice, they ended up in the factories. Oh, maybe they had to pack fish. That sounds like a smelly job, doesn't it? Or strip tobacco leaves from the tobacco plants. And many of them worked in the shirtwaist companies, had to make shirtwaist dresses. And of course, at that time, conditions were really quite bad. Poor pay, maybe $6 an hour for $6 a week. What am I saying? $6 a week? Hot in the summer, cold in the winter, poor ventilation. And a lot of times the equipment was so poor that they might actually injure their bodies. You know, get arms and fingers and such cut off or hurt. You know, I'm just going to go ahead and just push this over once again so that seam is behind the triangle. Just going right down there. All right. That's one part of the whole block. Almost done. Let me just go ahead and move this right up here. That's the center of the block, because these are what these pieces look like. Now actually, there's a little extra right up here that we can go ahead and square that off in the end. But we've got these 4 parts. Now the rest of the star is very similar to the Sojourner Truth Star. And I'll just go over that quickly because I showed you how to do that part last time. You start out first with your 3 1/2 inch background square, and you need to have 2 squares that are 3 7/8 inches, and you just go ahead, cut those on the diagonal, and sew those 2 together. Sew those together, and then this last part of the star is a 7 1/4 inch square. Let's see if I can just go ahead. 7 1/4 cut it from one corner, line up that ruler very carefully because this is critical that your ruler is right on the corners. And then once that's cut into fourths, this piece goes right onto here. And then the last time I showed you, told you some different tricks on it. I said if you go ahead and push your seams, the first one into the background, the second one into the background, then when you're done pressing it flat, you have match points out here. See how these little tips are hanging up here? You can match that in the next step. Well, you might see just a shade of the seam allowance down underneath. A little hard to see, but I did do another one just in case. Now see, this time I pushed the seam away from the background, towards the dark, away from the background, towards the dark. And when you look at that, now you see you don't have those same points out there to match. So actually, I think it's up to you which way you want to push your seams, but do make 4 of these as well. And as soon as I get my other 2 done, I'll show you how to sew the block together. Didn't take long to get all those pieces sewn together. Now let me show you how the block looks all laid out. Here's the 4 patch right in the middle, and then the 4 points of the star right off of the 4 patch, and then these are the pieces made with the triangles on each side. Now when you sew the block together, you always sew vertical rows, and this one looks like it's on point. So you take the middle row, the second row, flip it right sides together to the first row, and then you just assembly line sew straight down. But let me show you these points right here, because this is the one where the background, the seams are pressed towards the background. Watch when you put those together, got perfect points to match. Right here, they're just square. These should both be 4 3/4 inches. Now this one has a square bottom. That's an easy start. But right here, the seam has been pressed away from the background. And whenever you line that up right there, you've just got to judge how far to let that little tip hang out. This one's pushed the opposite way. Let's see how I do. See which way you like it. You can try both. Okay, just go ahead and take the first piece, line that up right at the top. That's where you've got some seams to match. I do have the 1/4 inch foot with that little edge on it. It makes it so nice to line up. But as soon as you get it anchored, then go to the opposite end, just with your stiletto, hold on to it, make sure your 4 patch seams are going as you press them. Then stop right there, just pick up that next piece, line up those corners. Let's see if I can get it going right behind it. Keep those edges together. This stiletto is just so helpful for doing that. And then just pick up the next piece right behind. This is the one that has the background pushed away. Let's see, line this up right here. And then down here, you've got to pull. You've got to have a little bit of that tip. It's almost about 3/8 of an inch that you have to have hanging out so that you can line that up. Let's see, lost it. Hold on to it. Get that together. Okay, let's take a check from the right side. Maybe I should look first, see what we have. Okay, when you open up here, see, that could have been, that's pretty good. From here to here, that's 1/4 of an inch. Could have been down just a little bit more. Up at the opposite end, let's see. Okay, looking great. Got that 1/4 inch seam ready to go. Okay, so let me just go ahead, open these up. You don't clip them, keep them all chained together. Just stack the 3rd row, put it to your right. I always like to just take it and flip it right sides together. And while I do this, I'll tell you a little bit more about Jane Addams and Hull House. Now, since they were having the union meetings there, it's appropriate that Jane Addams became the very first vice president of a new labor union. It was called National Women's Trade Union, League of America. Now that is a mouthful, isn't it? Because just more and more women were finding it necessary to let everybody know what was actually happening in the factories. They wanted the government to make changes. You know, in the year 1909 in New York City, there were actually 35,000 women that were part of that union, the Shirtwaist Union. And probably one of those best-known shirtwaist companies was the Triangle Shirtwaist Company. And they say, oh yeah, it was all managed by family members. And whenever those rubber-heeled soles came out, they all got them. Kind of crept up on the girls and surprised them completely. And they were very important in the union development. Okay, let me take a look. Got this vertical row sewn together. Okay, you don't clip it, you just flip it the opposite way. And right here, push the seams in opposite directions. I'm going to go away from the four patch and towards the triangles. And you can just go ahead and finger match those. Get those all lined up and let me just go across. Well, they went on strike. 30,000 of those ladies went on strike, including the triangle shirt company ladies. And they worked out, most of the management came to an agreement and went back from their strike. Well, the triangle shirt company had no agreement. The workers still went back. And you know, they never even thought to discuss their fire exits, why they would keep the fire exits locked. And on top of that, they never even checked the fire escapes. Well, they went back to work. Maybe things were a little bit better. 2 years later, they had an unbelievable fire where 149 of those people actually were burned up in a fire. They could not get out those fire escapes. And the union was there, of course. Jane Addams, I'm sure, was there to offer sympathy. They had a memorial service. Actually, that union was booed because the workers said, "You have come to our help too late." Sad story. Okay, just one more seam I have to do on that. And all you really need to do, once you've got that second seam done, let me just put that one away and I'll finish it because I want to show you how you're going to square that up. Now, they should come to about 12.5 inches, but mine is actually going to come to about 12.25. It's just how you press in your seam, trim it on two sides, so you straighten that up, and then just turn it around. Make sure you have that 1/4 inch seam the whole way around. And as soon as I get this squared up, I'll show you how to set a whole quilt together. Yankee Doodle Dandy was a #1 hit in 1894, and this quilt reminds me of Yankee Doodle and these red, white, and blues. It's just great. Now, there are 2 pieces of patchwork in this border treatment. The center is a very special piece, and it's a fussy cut. Right here you can see, and this piece of fabric is perfect for that fussy cut. Now, the size of the piece is 1 7/8 inches, so you just take your 6x6 and place the 1/4 inch line on either side of it, and then just go ahead, trim that on 2 sides, then turn your ruler and then cut it perfect to a 1 7/8, and then that medallion is just centered right in the block. Ooh, it looks good. Now, go ahead and take a 3-inch square, cut it on the diagonals twice, and you sew that on 2 sides, flip it out, and then sew it on the remaining 2 sides. So that's what that center piece looks like, centered in the middle. Now, this is oversized, so it's squared up to 2.5 inches. So drop it so that the 1/4 inch points are right in those tips. Ooh, this is looking good. Couldn't be better. Trim it on 2 sides, go ahead and turn it around, and then make it a perfect 2.5 inches. Now, with this piece, 2.5 inches, the lattice also through the center of the quilt needs to be 2.5 inches. So you cut the lattice 2.5 by the size of your block, and then just sew all 4 blocks together right through the middle and down the sides, and then finish it off by adding additional blue the whole way around the outside edge. Now, the last part is easy because it's just stripes, white and red, and you literally cut those the size of the block plus 1 inch. And you need to have 8 of them look just like this. And this little pinwheel comes from 3-inch squares that you do the diagonal sewing around it. Now, when you open that up, square that up to 2.5 inches too. And that's just going to fit right in there. Sew 8 pinwheels together, and you sew those around the outside edge. Oh, what a great Americana touch. I love to search for old quilts. Well, I often find them in excellent condition, and usually they are expensive. Sometimes the price is right, but they need repaired. Well, I found this old crazy quilt in a trunk in the attic. At first glance, it looks beautiful. The center block is the showpiece of the quilt, and it's still in excellent condition. Well, it appears to be an anchor, perhaps made for a sailor. But when you look close at the rest of the blocks, the quilt is in need of repair. Now, the fabric has disappeared right here, and it needs to be replaced. What you actually see is the backing for the block. Now, you could spend time and you could repair this whole quilt, or you could just go ahead and take the best section and frame it like this one. Oh, this makes a great room accent with those small pieces. Now, I particularly like the embroidery in this block. I want to try to do something like that with my sewing machine. So I'm going to repair this block and I'll turn it into a vest, something like I'm wearing. Now, I have some good fabric from the other blocks, plus I've got some old ties that I can use. Well, this sounds like a challenge, but I have some great tools to help me. Cutting up that quilt was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but I think I have it, so I've used some of the best parts. Now, whenever I cut near that embroidery, the fabric was very weak, and so I'm going to reinforce it with some iron-on interfacing. You can do it a couple of different ways. You can just go ahead and slip that interfacing in between the two and then press it, make it stronger, or just fuse the two together to make it stronger. And maybe to save this piece, it's very worn, you can put a piece of net, hand stitch a piece of net over top of it. But I'm just going to cover that whole piece up right there, the little bit of lace around the neckline. Now you need to do some hand stitching. I'm going to do something along here. Hand or machine in this area. Oh, this really needs some fancying up. And just put some pearls on top of it. Now the ribbon right here has deteriorated, and I'm going to just go ahead and replace it with this piece of ribbon, actually better condition. Now there were 4 fans in the quilt top, and I saved the best one, but it does need some stitching up along here. And look at this. That fabric is completely gone. The flower right here used to have a little print on it too. I'm going to just take a doily, cover that up, and put some pearls too. Now this area right here looks pretty gray, not much interest. So I decided to take another piece of velvet from the quilt that's in good condition, and I'm going to embroider a flower right on it. I put it in my embroidery hoop already. I lowered my feed dogs right here and put on my embroidery foot. So the machine is all set up, and you just go ahead, let's see if I raise that foot right there, slip the foot under, and let me put this into the embroidery hoop carriage and just twist that tight. Oh, got that in place. That's good. Okay, now lift up the hoop and slip the stabilizer underneath, and then just drop that presser foot. Ooh, I'm going to get the start butt going. Just take a few stitches, and as soon as it anchors, stop it so that you can go back and cut these threads. Now, you don't want these threads getting all mixed up in your stitching. Then just press again, and those leaves are just going to start forming. I mean, it's just amazing to sit there and watch it go. Now, I am going to be changing threads as I go along. I'm going to use the green first and 2 different shades of pink. And this whole process is going to take about 20 minutes. I put in the pale pink thread, and now it's stitching the rows. I put in the second pink, and it's just doing the outline stitching around the lighter pink now. Well, Jane Addams certainly would have filled her leisure time if she knew how to make these roses. Look at that. That is beautiful. And it even beeps, tells me when to stop and cut those threads. Okay, now all I have to do is just unfasten it here. Lift that out. See if I can slip this out so you can see it. Oh, that is great. Now, all I'm going to do is just trim around the outside edge. Let me pull that away so you can see the stabilizer. I'll turn under these raw edges, trim it all away, turn under those raw edges, and then with that lace on top, boy, I can have that rose right in the shoulder. That would be beautiful. Well, Jane Addams was the champion of the homeless, the friendless, and the penniless. In 1931, she was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for her efforts in helping humanity. Well, may you enjoy quilting. Think about Jane Addams as you do it.